Welcome to Plot Twist Radio, the show where creativity, storytelling, and the unpredictable path of the creative life all collide. I'm your host, Erin Egnatz. Hello, and welcome back to Plot Twist Radio. Before we get into my interview, today's episode is a little different. I want to open the door to a story that's been waiting for the right moment to be heard. The key to Wonderland has lived quietly in my headphones, performed by some of the most talented voice actors I've ever worked with. And today, before it officially goes on sale, I'm opening the door just a crack. What you're about to hear is the beginning of that journey.
The key turns in the lock with a whisper, like the universe is trying not to wake me up too fast. The bell above the door gives its usual chiming yawn, and just like that, another thrilling day at Thistle and Thorn Books begins. Cue the imaginary applause. The familiar scent of old paper, wood polish, and probably some deeply embedded cat dander wraps around me like a well-worn sweater. I inhale deeply, because if I'm going to spiral into existential monotony, at least let it smell like vintage novels and forgotten dreams. I flick the lights on and do my usual slow stroll through the aisles, my sacred little kingdom of ink and spines. I touch covers like I'm blessing them, straightening crooked books and silently judging whoever shelved romance in with political thrillers. Probably Chad. Or maybe it was me yesterday. No one needs to know. Morning, I mumble to no one in particular, then correct myself. Well, morning to you, weird, haunted Jane Austen cutout. I nod at her cardboard form near the classics section. She doesn't reply, but I'm pretty sure she's judging my outfit. After a few minutes of robotic shelf straightening, my hands drift to the fantasy section. My safe space, my escape hatch, my coping mechanism. I linger there, eyes flicking across dragons, dystopias, vampire love triangles. All fictional, all preferable to real life. And then, because I hate myself, I glance at the bottom shelf where Alice's Adventures in Wonderland mocks me with its frilly title and pastel cover. I still don't get the appeal, I mutter. A fever dream with tea and trauma. The book twitches. I freeze. Nope, just my imagination. Definitely not the book. It definitely is not backlit by an otherworldly glow. I am definitely not unraveling this early in the morning. I shake off the weird and march to the front door, flipping the sign to open with the flair of someone pretending they aren't actively dissociating. 10 minutes later, Mrs. Thompson enters like a suburban hurricane in a cardigan. The bell chimes politely, but her perfume punches me in the face. "Good morning, Alicia," she chirps, clutching her purse like it's full of secrets and Werther's originals. "Mrs. Thompson?" I smile, feeling dead inside. "Back for more murder and midlife crisis lit?" She giggles. "Of course! I finished Death by Darjeeling last night. It was okay." "So just a decaffeinated disappointment?" She winks. "Hit me with something spicier." I guide her to the mystery section with the practiced ease of someone who should probably charge more for therapy sessions disguised as book racks. As she leaves with her latest paperback fling, I return to the front, only mildly questioning my existence. Through the window, Main Street bustles with purpose. Everyone rushing somewhere, doing things, living lives that, at the very least, amount to aimlessly wandering. I glance at my reflection in the glass. Same tired green eyes, same messy ponytail, same bookstore shirt I swore I'd burned 2 years ago. Behind me, rows of stories wait for someone, anyone, to give a damn. The next customer is an elderly man who wanders in with a limp and a 1,000-yard stare. I help him find a book on Viking raids and human sacrifice. "Something light, right?" I offer. He grunts, which I assume means yes. Then come the teenagers. Loud. Energy drink buzzed. One's wearing a hoodie that says, "No thoughts, just vibes." Honestly, respect. "Got anything epic?" one asks, eyeing me like I might be hiding a secret stash of forbidden knowledge. Vampires or werewolves? Both? I hand them a romance with fangs on the cover and abs on the spine. They squeal. I pretend I'm not silently judging their taste while also remembering I read that exact book 3 months ago. As the day wore on, the shop became quiet. It was the kind of quiet only bookstores and graveyards seemed to master. Soft, slightly dusty, and filled with the low hum of secrets. I was half asleep behind the register, mentally debating the ethics of organizing the self-help books by author name or by level of delusion, when the door creaked open. Not chimed, not jingled. Creaked. Like the sound from an old horror movie. That was new. The man who stepped in didn't belong in Main Street, Illinois. Or possibly this century. His suit looked older than my great-aunt's floral wallpaper, pinstripes, pocket watch, and all. He walked like someone who had nowhere to be but everywhere to remember. "Can I help you find something?" I asked, because I am a professional, or at least someone who pretends really well on weekdays. He glanced at me with pale, stormy eyes that made me feel like a poorly filed receipt under fluorescent lighting. "I'm looking for a specific title," he said, voice soft but precise, a faint English accent, barely discernible. "I believe you carry it." I blinked. Maybe? What's the title?" He smiled slightly. "Through the Veil. Lost Histories of the Unwritten Realms." "That doesn't sound familiar," I said, already rising from my stool. "But I'll check the system." Spoiler, I didn't have a system. I had a rickety, outdated iPad running a spreadsheet with passive-aggressive tabs. Still, I searched it. Nothing. "I'm sorry," I said, glancing up. "We've never had—" But he was already walking. Past the counter, past the fantasy section, straight to the back corner where we kept the rare books and misprints. The weird section, lovingly curated by yours truly and aggressively ignored by the general public. He stopped, tilted his head, and pulled a book from the shelf I swear wasn't there 5 minutes ago. A black leather cover, silver embossing, a strange rune etched into the spine. "That's not—" I started, stepping toward him. He held up a hand. Not threatening, just absolute. "It's always here, Alicia." My blood chilled. "How do you know my name?" He opened the book. Not like a customer, like a priest at an altar, flipping pages that hummed under his fingertips. I was torn between calling the cops and asking if he had a LinkedIn profile for cult recruitment. But I just stood there, rubbernecking the reality warp like a hungover mall Santa with no escape from a food court stampede. He smiled down at the page. "You're wondering about the book. You're wondering about me. Both are reasonable instincts." I tried to laugh. Instead, something between a cough and a whimper slithered out. "People don't usually quote my inner monologue at me, sir." He touched the page, tracing a sentence that shimmered, actually shimmered like heat above asphalt. When he spoke next, his words vibrated in the dusty stillness. "What do you do, Alicia, when a story needs fixing?" For a heartbeat, I actually considered all the times I jokingly talked to the books here. I felt the red creep up my cheeks, silly and spooked. Mostly, I make coffee and ring up the occasional true crime junkie, sir. I'm no writer." "No, you are the key," he replies simply, placing the book gently in front of me. Not sure how to respond to that odd little tidbit, I chose avoidance, pretending I didn't hear. "No price tag," I murmured, stalling. "And it's not in the system." "It's not for the system," he said. "Just for me." He handed me a coin. Not a bill, a coin. Heavy, strange, etched with a heart split down the middle. The moment it touched my palm, the air buzzed like the silence before a thunderclap. I blinked. He was gone. Door didn't open. Bell didn't ring. Gone. The book, too. Only the coin remained, and the faintest smell of roses and smoke. I held the coin up, inspecting the split heart. It looked handmade, maybe even antique, the lines between halves uneven like a wound that hadn't healed right. I tried to remember if I'd ever read about currency like this, something occult or ceremonial in my years of mainlining fantasy. Nothing came to mind except a sense of déjà vu, faded and sticky and not quite comfortable. When I closed my hand, the coin stayed warm. The warmth ran up my wrist. I pressed my thumb over the split heart, waiting for a hidden mechanism or message, or maybe just some clue about what happened. Nothing. Just a weight. A charge like the air before a tornado or the moment before you say something you can't take back. I hid the coin in the pocket of my jeans. It felt safer out of sight. On the off chance this was a prank, or worse, a memory slip, I'd deal with it after closing. The day limped on. A package delivery, a toddler dropping crackers in the coloring books, a grad student arguing with someone on FaceTime about post-structuralism right by the register. I fielded it all, but my brain kept snagging on the morning, on the book, on the man's voice. How did he know my name? Once the shop was finally empty, I locked the door and leaned against it, soaking in the dusty silence. The dim lights cast sharp shadows around me. It felt like the perfect night for a breakdown or a ghost story. Possibly both. I reached into my pocket to retrieve the coin, my curiosity overtaking me once more. It wasn't there.
That was the first chapter of A Key to Wonderland. If Wonderland pulls you in, sit tight because it officially goes on sale later this month. But this preview is just for you. Now, let's get into our interview. The idea that words don't just exist on the page, but are meant to be heard and experienced, is exactly what today's guest, poet Bob, has dedicated his life to exploring. Bob, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
It's great to have you. Could you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Well, I've been writing poetry all my life, and I'm obsessed with the tension between accessibility and technique. The first impression lets the reader in, but that structural depth kind of gives them a reason to return. And I've always been concerned with the totality of a poem for its visual presentation on the stage as well as orally. Um, and that attention to detail and the reader's experience, excuse me, led to a stage presentation of my work in 2024. That was when an incredible ensemble of actors presented my work in ways that astounded.
So you said you've been into poetry your whole life. What
Yep.
kept the writing alive during, going through film and tech and fatherhood? What kind of kept that writing alive for you?
Well, I mean, the quick and easy answer is the poems just kept coming. And I guess that's the hard answer too.
I'm an author. It's one of those things once you start, it doesn't seem like you can stop. There's always a new story trying to come out of you. So I'm assuming poetry is the same way.
Yep. They not writing these down was never an option.
So who first introduced you to poetry?
A high school teacher.
Really?
Um, he had eclectic views. We spent 3 or 4 weeks on Walt Whitman, an afternoon on Emily Dickinson, and then, about 3 or 4 more weeks on the Beat Poets, um, and visited a few others along the way. but, that's what really opened my ears up.
It's always good to have a good teacher, to kinda get you into what you love. Looking back, do you think that your teacher knew that he was shaping something long term, or did it take decades for that influence to fully surface?
Well, he knew he was having a pretty profound effect on me. I didn't hide it.
So, many people believe creative breakthroughs kinda have a deadline. You published The Human Equation later in life. What
Mhm.
age and lived experience, has given you the younger Bob couldn't have accessed?
Um, it's interesting, and, your poetry especially, I think a lot of it starts at the personal. So, my younger poems, I kinda call it my angry young man phase. They were more rooted in that youthful energy, and they've gotten more retrospective as I've gotten older, um, and had different experiences. Every now and then, I try to revisit that younger self, however.
Understandable. So could you tell us a little bit about The Human Equation?
It's, uh it's a collection of my poems from, the first one when I was I think the earliest one I wrote when I was 17 or 18. The most recent, a few months before the last edition came out. And I have another book in another edition in February that will have about 5 or 6 more poems, most recent from December. No, I'm not December won't be in the book, I'm sorry. Most recent from last spring.
So you've adapted it into both a live stage performance and a film, correct?
Yes. Um, a couple years ago, I a number of years ago, I began reading my poems with multiple voices, having other readers, trading it off, and I felt that that really helped uh, keep the interest up, keep the energy up, and, uh, and I and then I just got the crazy idea of, oh, I was reading once with a professional actor, uh, and I just immediately recognized that he was so much better at this than I was, and I just was standing there going, "I want more of that." So I took him out to lunch and hired him to direct a stage play of my work. Sonny Ra who was not in the ended up not being in the show, but he was the director, but really talented guy.
I get what you mean about that too, because, I hire voice actors for my audiobooks, and just hearing it from a different perspective, with a little bit of
Mhm.
flair to it, it really adds to it, I think. What does the performance allow poetry to do that the printed page possibly couldn't?
Well, a lot of things. I mean, for one, I think that poetry has become scary to a lot of the American public. I don't think it's really taught in school, it's not taught well. A lot of poetry isn't written for the general public. It isn't written to be accessible and sometimes not entertaining. Um, and when you take it up on stage and it just helps things come alive, it helps people's ears open up.
You describe always having a poem in your back pocket. What
Yep.
does your writing process actually look like? Are you, disciplined? Are you spontaneous? Or is it somewhere in between?
The po There are outliers where sometimes just you're I once I was driving along and a poem hit me, and I pulled out I am ashamed to say I pulled out my phone and began recording into it. But that actually was a poem that I'd been thinking about for 3 or 4 years, and that's typical for me. I'll often think about, an idea or a concept for a long time before I write it. Before I write a poem, I usually have an idea of what kind of language it will have. Is it going to be wide and conversational? Is it going to be more dense? What the line structure will be? Is it going to be short? And what it's going to almost look like on the page. I think about the different ideas that I can bring in and what perspective. I think about images. But then when the moment I work on that for a long time, but the moment that the words start to happen, I sit down and write, and often at that point, the final poem is very recognizable. I do a lot of editing, but the final product is very similar in the end to what came off the page. But there was a lot of work ahead of.
Your work, I've read through it. I love it. Your work feels
Well, thank you so
accessible.
much.
Absolutely. But it rewards close reading as well. How intentional is that balance between plain speech and the layered meaning?
Absolutely intentional. That's to me what it's all about. You do something long enough. At the beginning, it was a passion, and over the years, it became, I don't want to say a profession, but you take pride in craftsmanship. Uh, I write mostly free verse, but I explore forms when it moves me. So I take a lot of pride and pay a lot of attention to the technique.
You've lived many lives, factory worker, filmmaker, entrepreneur, editor, father. How do those identities show up on the page even when they're not explicitly named?
But um, there's a phrase that I keep coming back to, and I took one TV production class in college, and the professor beat into us the phrase meticulous attention to detail. And that has become kind of a mantra for me throughout my whole life and everything I've done. That um, when I care about something, I pay a lot of attention to the details.
Is there a poem in the human equation that feels most autobiographical? I guess I could say that easily. Or one that surprised you by revealing something you didn't know you were carrying?
Interesting question. There are quite a f- there are quite a few that are autobiographical, and but a poem goes through an interesting process. It will start from something in my experience, but at a certain poem, at a point, the requirements of the poem take over, and it becomes a life of its own, and it will require images or thoughts that are almost the opposite of what I had, but it's what the poem itself needed. And I recall that there were some poems that it took me a while to figure out why I wrote them, and I'm trying to remember which ones they were now. Maybe it'll come to me in a minute, but yeah, there were times, particularly when I was younger, when I'd write something going, what does this mean? And it would only be over time that I understood what I was trying to get at.
Yeah, I get like that too with a lot of my writing. I will go back to it and I'll be like, "Well, I don't even know what I meant by that, but it's kinda powerful in a way. It's almost therapeutic."
Yeah.
How has you touched on this a little bit, but how has your work changed as you've revisited it over time?
Well, I try not. I don't revisit the older poems. At a certain point, you have to put them aside, and I might think, oh, I could do it differently, but you have to respect. I think at a certain point, you start making things worse. You have to respect what they are and where they came from. Um, I I guess I'm lucky because I like my early poems. Still, I think they stand.
That's good. That's confidence in your work, and that's what you need as a writer. So, when audiences experience your work, what do you hope they feel walking away from it?
Okay, I did an early show almost as a prototype where we did it professionally. We lit it. We rented a studio, recruited mostly family and friends to perform, and I invited everyone I knew. And one of my good friends who had knew nothing about poetry had no expectations walking in. When he was walking out, he had this kind of glazed look on his face, and he said, "That was way better than I expected." And to this day, that's almost the greatest compliment that, my work's ever had. I surprised him. He thought, "Oh, probably, oh god, I have to go listen to an hour of poetry." And he walked out going, "Wow."
That's a good compliment, it really is, because, I'm known as a ghost hunter, so when I switched over to writing, people are like, "Oh,
Mhm.
you can actually write." So I know exactly what you're.
2 things, who
Yeah,
knew?
look at that. What would you say to creatives who are still writing quietly, waiting for that someday to arrive?
I mean, of course, keep writing. Find people to show your work to. I've been fortunate. I had a good friend from my 20s who's a wonderful writer who and for there were years when he was the only person that read what I wrote, but he functioned over the decades as my editor and sounding board, and that was invaluable. His name's Paul Walker, and he's written a number of wonderful books.
That's good. That's good to have someone like that to help
Yeah.
you along, and it's excellent advice. So, what is up next for you?
I mentioned there's a new edition of my book coming out in February, and that's been obsessing me for the last few months. And before that, there was producing the show and then producing the video of the show that occupied me. I'm actually looking forward to having no big projects after February, March, and actually focusing more on writing. The other things distract me, and it's not that I haven't written, but I'd like to focus more directly.
Sure. So, where can the listeners find you?
BobGossom.com is the easiest. I'm on Instagram if you search for Bob Gossom, Facebook, search for Bob Gossom. So, yeah, it's easy to find, and I have a lot of poems posted on my website. And also on my website, I have a lot of poems with what I call the backstory. I write about how the poem came to be and what it meant to me and what I thought about as I wrote it. I find it interesting.
Yeah, I think a lot of people want to know, what the basis of it is. That's one of my favorite things to explore with an author is
Mhm.
and poet, where did the story originate from? So I do love that. And like I said, we will have all of your links in the show notes. So everyone
Wonderful.
be sure to take a look at that. And Bob, it's been wonderful having you.
Oh, my pleasure.
Have a great weekend.
And yourself.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Before we wrap up, I want to thank Bob for joining me today and for sharing his journey through poetry, performance, and the lifelong pursuit of language. You can find Bob's work, including poems and the stories behind them, at his website and on social media. We'll have all those links waiting for you in the show notes. And if the opening of this episode pulled you into Wonderland, that story is just beginning. The Key to Wonderland audiobook, performed by an incredible cast of voice actors, will be available for purchase on Spotify later this month. And if you enjoyed today's episode, make sure you're following Plot Twist Radio wherever you listen, and if you have a moment, a review or a rating goes a long way in helping the show reach new listeners. As always, thank you for spending part of your day with me, and until next time, keep listening for the stories that change everything.